Alright, what is going on, guys? It's Tazz here, and welcome back to the channel. Now today what I've got for you guys is my Crisis on Earth X crossover review. Now before I get into anything, I just want to say obvious spoiler warning if you guys have not seen the entirety of the Crisis on Earth X crossover, but if you have, let's continue. So this year's crossover was done a bit differently than last year. Last year we only had really 3 episodes that kind of pertain to the overall story of the crossover, and Supergirl wasn't really included in that sort of episode count, but this year they actually changed it and we had a full 4-show crossover, but the 4-show crossover was done over 2 nights, which I think was actually a very smart move for them to do. We had 2 episodes on Monday and then 2 episodes to finish off on Tuesday, and they just flowed very well, and it pretty much just felt like a movie with a little bit of a break in between. And right from that opening scene of this crossover, I could tell that we were in for a very enjoyable crossover because it just felt really cool, felt really different than sort of any other episode that we would get on a normal week. It definitely felt a bit more high budget and sort of, like I said, a lot more movie-like, and that was definitely really nice to see. This year's crossover saw everybody from all 4 shows gather in present-day Central City on Earth 1 for Barry and Iris's wedding. And as everybody was gathering at the church for the wedding, we had a nice little Easter egg, or most likely it was an Easter egg. We had somebody come up to Barry, and she was sort of working there at the wedding, and she didn't really, she didn't say her name or anything, but she just sort of said how excited she was to be there, and was kind of acting a little bit awkward. So what a lot of people are thinking is she is actually Dawn Allen from the future, Barry and Iris's future daughter, one half of the Tornado Twins, that sort of came back in time to watch the wedding, and it's just a nice little Easter egg that they put in there. And maybe they'll delve deeper into this later on The Flash at some point, but maybe they won't, and this is just sort of a nice nod to say, hey, she came back in time to watch the wedding. But unfortunately, the wedding did not go as planned, as it was obviously interrupted by Nazis from Earth X. And with the wedding being crashed, we obviously got a really cool fight scene here in the church. We had pretty much everybody just sort of going in on the Nazis and just, beating them up and, just defending everybody. And it was definitely a really cool fight scene. Definitely one of my favorite fight scenes from this crossover as a whole. We got to see some new powers from some people. Well, not really new powers, but sort of new moves. We got to see this sort of like ice sword that Killer Frost made with her hand, which was really cool. We saw Supergirl do this sort of like sonic clap, which we've never seen before, which was also really cool. We saw some people using their powers in different ways, like Cisco opening up breaches for Oliver to jump through and shoot arrows, and it was just a really cool fight scene. Eventually, we had the Earth X forces retreating, but not before the heroes were actually able to capture Earth X Prometheus and bring him back to Star Labs. After everybody regrouped in Star Labs, we kind of had this bleed over into the next episode, which was definitely really cool to see how they just pretty much seamlessly transitioned between episode to episode. It'll be definitely really cool to go back and rewatch this if they release it sort of like as a movie on its own, watch it without any commercials or anything, but from watching it, it definitely flowed really well, and if you just sort of plucked out the commercials, it would just feel like a movie transitioning from scene to scene, and it's just pretty crazy how seamlessly they went from episode to episode, and really from night to night. But after transitioning into part 2 of the crossover, we ended up actually getting the reveal of who Earth X Prometheus was, and I definitely really enjoyed this because it was a nice nod to everybody who had the theory that last year on Arrow that Prometheus could be Tommy Merlin. They actually did it here in the crossover. They had Earth X Prometheus be the Earth X version of Tommy, which was just absolutely awesome. There were some rumors, some rumblings before the crossover came out. People had spotted him on set and everything, or the actor that played Tommy, saying, oh yeah, he's in the crossover, and he was only there for a small amount of time, and you can obviously tell just because he was only really in a couple of scenes there down in the pipeline, but it was just definitely really awesome to see Tommy here in the crossover, even though he was a Nazi and he didn't last very long. But after those scenes with Tommy, we got sort of a little Earth X history lesson from Harry, saying that Earth X was sort of the 53rd Earth, but people didn't really like mentioning it because obviously it was overrun by Nazis. But skipping ahead a little bit in the episode, we got our first confrontation between our heroes and their evil Earth X counterparts, and it was definitely pretty interesting to see that the Reverse Flash that was on Earth X is actually our version of Eobard Thawne that's disguising himself as Harrison Wells because, the good old times. So he was disguising himself as Harrison Wells that went over to Earth X and, just sort of joined the crazy Earth X Nazis. But after a little fight between our heroes and their Earth X counterparts, we transition over to the sort of end scene, or not really end scene, but end final battle for this first night of the crossover, where we had everybody go to the warehouse, or just a warehouse, where all of the Earth X Nazis were, and we had a nice little fight scene in here as well that incorporated all of our heroes over on Earth 1. But it wasn't obviously, not obviously, but it wasn't as great as the church scene. The church scene was really, really cool, but this one was still a really cool fight scene nonetheless. But in the end, our heroes were actually defeated and sort of captured by the Earth X Nazis and everything, and they were sort of given the whole evil villain speech, sort of saying what their plan was, and pretty much what the Earth Xers kind of wanted was they needed Supergirl's heart to save Overgirl, who was actually sort of had too much solar radiation in her that it's definitely a cool little callback, or not really callback, but sort of reference or Easter egg to the All-Star Superman series, where that actually happened to Superman. Was he sort of absorbed too much solar radiation and he was going to die. So it's definitely kind of cool to see that they sort of did this little story here for Overgirl on Earth X. But night one of our crossover ended with our heroes waking up on Earth X in sort of a, not really a concentration camp, but kind of sort of like a, I guess kind of like a holding cell, not a holding cell, but sort of like this, just sort of an area with a whole bunch of other prisoners on Earth X. But it was definitely nice to see that the next part, or the next half of the crossover, pretty much picked up exactly where we left off in part 2. But like I said before, part 3 picked up pretty much right where part 2 ended, and we had the introduction of the Earth X version of Quentin Lance, who was definitely a high-ranking official within sort of the Earth X Nazi army. And with his introduction, we got all of our Earth 1 heroes, in addition to a new freedom fighter on Earth X, the Ray. We had them all sort of marched out into kind of like this open field to be executed, and right when they thought that they were all going to die, in comes Citizen Cold. And with the help of Citizen Cold and the Ray, our Earth 1 heroes were able to escape to the freedom fighter base that was actually just the Arrow bunker on Earth X, but I definitely thought that it was really nice to see sort of them not really reusing things, but sort of showing us our sort of familiar surroundings, but on Earth X. And while in the bunker, we were sort of introduced to a new character that was obviously not a new character, but an Earth X version of a character. We got introduced to the Earth X version of Win, who was completely different than he is on Supergirl. He was just sort of like, how do I put it? Kind of mean. But he was the leader of the Resistance, or the Freedom Fighters, whatever you want to call them, on Earth X. But it was definitely nice to sort of see another alternate version of a character that we sort of know from the other shows. But after a couple of inspirational conversations between our characters, the Earth 1 heroes, in addition to Citizen Cold and the Ray, go head over to the breach between Earth X and Earth 1 to try to get back over to Earth 1 in order to save everybody who's been sort of locked up in Star Labs now that it's been taken over by the Earth X Oliver and Reverse Flash, as well as save Supergirl from being sort of, cut open to have her heart taken out and put into Overgirl. But in order to get back to Earth 1, obviously they had to sort of fight some Earth X Nazis to clear out the area around the breach to get back over there. And we also had a pretty cool fight scene with the Flash and the Ray versus Red Tornado. And obviously it was all CGI, but it was still a really, really cool fight scene. And it was definitely nice to see them sort of go take down Red Tornado together. And it was definitely just a really cool scene there. But while trying to clear the area so they could go breach over to Earth 1, we had definitely one of the most sad scenes of the crossover, and this started me, I was about to lose it here, because when they were trying to sort of open up this breach so that they could get back over, Stein makes a decision that ultimately leads to his death, which I will talk about in a minute here. But, it was just kind of crazy to see this. Like, I kind of knew it was coming because, obviously the actor has to leave. He is something on Broadway that he's doing, so he obviously had to end up leaving the show, but it was just definitely really, really sad the way that they did this, but it was definitely just sort of kind of the perfect send-off for the character, and it definitely was done very well, but it was just really, really sad for me to see. In sort of a last-ditch effort to get the breach open, Stein decided to make a run for it to try to open up this breach, but unfortunately he was hit on the way to it, and he just kept going, and he got shot again, and it was just really, really hard to watch. But, you know, obviously he got there, he got the breach open, everybody cleared out the rest of the Earth X soldiers, and then Jax had to run over to him, and the only way to get him back over to Earth 1 was to, for their final time, merge into Firestorm. With everybody back on Earth 1, we had Jax go onto the Wave Rider into sort of the medical bay for Stein to sort of get treatment from Gideon, and we got sort of the lead up to just the saddest part of the crossover, and the part that literally had me tearing up, and I usually don't do that, but this scene between Jax and Stein was just so emotional and just so very well done and so well written. It was just like you couldn't help but get emotional there, because this is a character, Stein is a character that's been around since season 1 of The Flash. He's been around on 2.5 seasons of Legends now, and you just sort of seeing the bond between him and Jax and sort of their progression, even just in this crossover, and just sort of seeing him have to go this way it was just really emotional and really sad. And like I said, I literally teared up, and I legit almost cried because of this. But in order to save Jax, because of their sort of link because of Firestorm, Stein had to take the serum that Cisco made to sever their bond, and Jax just had to let Stein go. And it was just, like I said, it was just like the saddest scene of the crossover. Definitely really the most emotional scene really in any DC TV show to date now, and it's just really crazy, and it's a crazy scene, just a really sad scene, but it definitely was a nice send-off for the character of Martin Stein. But Stein's death kind of rallied everybody together, and they were ready to sort of go and make sure Stein's death was not in vain. So they had to go, you know, sort of team up, and everybody was just there on the Wave Rider, and that was just sort of one of the coolest things, is just seeing all those heroes on the Wave Rider at once was just pretty crazy and really awesome. And this leads into the big final battle, which will definitely make you feel better after watching those emotional scenes with Jax and Stein. But just seeing all the heroes walk into battle to fight the evil Earth X Nazi forces, and having all of our heroes, all of our main heroes, Green Arrow, Flash, and Supergirl go fight their counterparts, it was just an amazing sort of conclusion to this crossover. I really loved this sort of end fight scene and battle, and it was just really, really awesome to see all of our characters, all of our heroes just sort of teaming up together, and this was just sort of an amazing thing to see. This sort of final battle here was probably one of my favorite parts of this crossover, and I just really, really enjoyed it. And in the end, we had Overgirl actually end up dying and pretty much just kind of exploding from having all that excess solar radiation, and she ended up dying, and that obviously sort of made Earth X Oliver upset, considering they were obviously married on Earth X, but in this vulnerable state that he was in, it gave our Green Arrow, our Oliver, a chance to end him once and for all, and he actually ended up killing the Earth X version of himself as well. But then we also had Barry taking on the Reverse Flash, who is obviously from Earth 1, like I said before, and this was a really cool fight scene between them as well, but in the end, Barry had to let the Reverse Flash go, because as the Reverse Flash says, Barry just doesn't kill people, and he obviously won't kill the Reverse Flash, and most likely we won't ever see him kill the Reverse Flash, and even if he does, he'll just come back. So obviously the Reverse Flash will return. But after all of the Earth X forces were defeated, obviously all of our characters had to return to their own respective shows. So Kara and Alex obviously went back to Earth 38, and before Oliver and Felicity went back over to Arrow, there was a scene at the end, and obviously we knew that this was coming because everybody gathered for Barry and Iris's wedding, and obviously Barry and Iris were going to get married in this crossover. It was just a given. You sort of had to accept that. But the way that everything sort of happened at the end it was just, let's just not talk about it. And you guys know what I'd be mad at, and let's just let's just not talk about this end scene, and let's just pretend the final battle was the end scene and none of this stuff at the end actually happened. But in all seriousness, while I might not have been the biggest fan of how everything kind of ended here at the end, it was obviously sort of the way that you knew it was going to end. It had to end this way. It was going to be sort of a fitting end, and I'm obviously not mad that Barry and Iris got married. You know, that happens in the comics. It was gonna happen on the show. Sure, I'm fine with that. But just sort of the Oliver and Felicity thing at the end, they just really didn't need to do that right here and then. And obviously it was still kind of rude too for them to kind of interrupt Barry and Iris getting married as well, and Felicity's like, oh wait, can we get married too? And it's just like, no, please don't. But yeah, let's just stop talking about that. But in the end, while I do have a couple of minor nitpicks about this crossover, I still really enjoyed this crossover. I enjoyed it a lot more than I did last year's crossover. Even though I loved last year's crossover, this crossover was just absolutely amazing for the most part, and I just loved it, and it was just great. It was literally like a TV Justice League movie, and it ended up literally being like a 4-hour movie if you include the commercials. But I just sort of want to give everybody that worked on that crossover just a standing ovation, because this crossover was just amazing. You can definitely tell all of the hard work that everybody put into it, and it was just an amazing final product to see, and I just don't know how they'll actually top this next year. And I think all of the actors did great jobs on this crossover, especially everybody that had to play Earth X evil versions of themselves. Everybody just did awesome as their evil versions of themselves. Overgirl was awesome. Obviously, the Reverse Flash, Tom Cavanaugh doing Reverse Flash again, he was just great at it. Stephen Amell did a great job as the Earth X Oliver, definitely did a very good job portraying sort of this evil Nazi Oliver that we normally obviously would never get to see on Arrow. And it was just a nice sort of little touch that everybody had on their evil versions of themselves that just sort of made the crossover just that much better. And it was just awesome to see all of these evil versions of characters and just sort of different versions of characters that we don't normally get to see on the shows, and I just think that that was just amazing to see, and everybody did a great job with that. But on that note, guys, this video has been going on for way too long. I'm still sad about Stein, and I just am still hyped up on sort of this crossover adrenaline, but this crossover was amazing, and I want to know your guys' thoughts on this crossover down in the comments below. What did you think of it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Did you have some problems with it? Or did you just love it like I loved it and just had that little problem at the end? Or maybe you didn't have that problem at the end and you actually like that kind of stuff on the show. I want to know your guys' thoughts on this crossover down in the comments below. But until next time, guys, it's been Taz, and I will see you guys in the next video.